What's up, you guys? Welcome to The Imagination. I'm your host, Emma, and today I'm honored and excited to have back on the show for the third time, child assassin, SRA, human trafficking and mind control survivor, man of God, devoted father and husband, writer and author, podcast host at Nathan Reynolds on YouTube, content creator, international speaker, entrepreneur, farmer, military veteran, wilderness mentor, executive protection agent, transport specialist, chef for the homeless, market seller, and expert on all things linen and wool, Nathan Reynolds. A little bit about Nathan as a recap, in case you missed his incredible testimony the first time he was on the show. He was born into a multi-generational incest-based family through the Reynolds bloodline, and from birth was systematically abused, mind-controlled, and mentally fractured to keep his abuse compartmentalized with amnesic barriers. It wouldn't be until later in life and into his marriage that his suspicious past would begin unweaving and unwinding itself, revealing a layered double life checkered with deceit, betrayal, pain, torture, and horrors beyond comprehension, perpetrated on him from the same family, military, government, and community members that should have been protecting him, but instead were partaking in what Nathan has appropriately coined radically intelligent evil. The last time Nathan was on, we had the biggest turnout yet on any YouTube podcast premiere in the history of the imagination. You all showed up to listen to this incredible warrior share answers to some of the deepest, darkest, and most nitty-gritty questions he's been asked to answer before on any podcast. And I can't thank you all enough for giving Nathan the army he's always deserved to be surrounded by, God's army. The questions that Nathan answered on the last episode were submitted by all of you, and there were some absolutely thought-provoking and incredible questions. And as promised, we are going to continue our deep dive into Delta programming, being raised as a child assassin, the Jason groups and projects, human hunting, healing, and so much more on the second Q&A using the questions we didn't get to on the last episode. Nathan has this amazing way of bearing his soul to the world. It's one thing to be able to sit with people in their healing, and it's a completely different level to be able to sit with people in the disparity of their suffering and anguish from a place of genuine understanding. And Nathan has that gift. I believe one of the gifts God gave Nathan so his suffering wouldn't be in vain is the ability to sit with us all, and in turn we too finally feel seen. If you've been following Nathan's interviews and testimony, you've heard the story he tells about the first time he ever felt seen when he discovered the work of the late Russ Dizdar. Russ's work helped Nathan regain his identity and the tools he needed to remember who he really was and who he could become. And now, over 7 years later, Nathan stands strong and powerful in his convictions, passing the same torch he was given to everyone on the other side of the screen. Nathan is now our witness, and we are all finally seen. I'll have Nathan's playlist in the show notes. You can go indulge in the last couple episodes in case you missed them. And I highly encourage you guys to please go buy his book, Snatched from the Flames. I'm going to have that below also, all the links to grab that. He has a free PDF. He has a free audio version on his website and on his web and on his YouTube channel. And I would encourage you all to purchase it if you have the means to help support survivors. I'm also going to have Nathan's YouTube channel, TikTok, and every platform he's on in the show notes. Please go follow and support Nathan's work. A couple reminders and updates before we kick off today's episode. If you are on iTunes or Spotify, please leave this podcast a review and a rating if you find value in it. If you're on YouTube, please share and subscribe. And I just recently started a Substack account where I'm putting on my investigative journalist hat and would love your support. It's free to sign up, and you can find that at www.emmacatherine.substack.com. All my other links are in the show notes as well. Please connect with me so we can keep in touch should I be censored on any of these platforms. So you guys, without further ado, please help me in welcoming today's guest of honor, survivor and anti-child abuse advocate, fierce warrior, unrelenting voice for the voiceless, brilliant educator, overcomer, passionate pursuer of truth, and someone I'm honored to call a friend and a brother in Christ, the one, the only, Nathan Reynolds. Nathan, thank you so much for being here again today.
Fired up, Emma. Let's do this thing.
Man, last time was incredible. So we had a ton of amazing questions submitted. So for people who might have missed last time, or if you're new, I put out some feelers online to get some questions to ask Nathan that maybe people had never heard. and about some specific topics that Nathan doesn't get the opportunity to talk about a lot on podcasts, including programming and assassin training and human hunting and all these really dark things that he alludes to in his book but hasn't gone into a lot on a podcast. So we are going to take a lot of the questions, and we had a lot, you guys. We might have to span this over another episode or two, which is really cool, but we're going to start chipping away at this list a little bit more. Again, go listen to that last episode to learn a little bit about what we talked about last time, and we're going to build on that a little bit this time, although you don't have to listen to that first episode to understand the context of this one. So Nathan, I thought we would start with one of the first questions actually that I was submitted, and you had answered this a little bit last time, but when we had talked off camera, you had mentioned a few more things, and I thought it would be a really great opportunity to go into this specific topic. But somebody was asking about deep underground military bases and if they exist and what you have seen and your experiences being in these programs. And you had alluded a little bit to it last time, but I know that there's a little bit of a deeper story to this that you've experienced, and I'd love for people on the other side to hear it, because it's not something that we're exposed to, not being in here. And there's so many of these unknown horrific things that are going on behind the scenes that us, the public, are not made aware of. So I'm going to turn it over to you to maybe explain your own experiences with this and what you want people to know about DUMBs and deep underground military bases.
Absolutely. So first of all, one of the most beneficial things people can do is research for themselves, first and foremost, above anything else, because someone else just sharing the information for you, that's like coming in one ear and very easy to go out the other. However, if you do some diligence on your own work with some of the tidbits of information, I'm going to just cover this entire podcast with all kinds of little pearls, all kinds of little threads for you to all go pull on and go do your own investigatory work. Deep underground military bases have their roots from antiquity. People have been literally finding ways to dig in and fortify themselves and survive conflicts. Okay. The big issue in the United States that made them a little bit distinct and different was the threat of nuclear war. When the threat of nuclear war became a reality, people no longer used the same fortification styles that used to exist pre-Nagasaki. You know, that once people began to turn cities to glass, it turned into an entirely different event. And so what happened here in the United States as a protective measure in order to ensure the survivability of the country was something that was established called the continuity of government, the COG. So the continuity of government was established in the 1940s and 50s and ongoingly. And the investments that began to pour into that industry are tremendous. And this is what continuity of government is that they needed a way to make sure that people have a form of leadership in place that does not get interrupted in the event of total nuclear war. If every military base, all of the political, judicial centers, all of the governing authority structure that exists on the surface of the earth gets completely neutralized in a massive nuclear strike, they needed a way of being able to still run the country and predominantly the military in the event of that Third World War. So the way they did that is they began to dig into the earth and began to excavate massive tunnel systems and begin to build cities underneath our feet, cities of infrastructure, cities of every complexity and level of society that exists up here on the surface. They began to replicate down beneath their feet. And that was so that they could have a state government ready to operate instantly, so that there wasn't a delay of service. Like when you're sitting there waiting for your cell phone to connect to the call and then it says it's looking for a signal. They didn't want any of that. They needed to be able to launch retaliatory strikes and be able to command everyone from those deep underground military bases. And this is what began to give birth in places like Virginia, West Virginia, and the major hubs of it happened along the East Coast. However, a lot of that began to get relocated towards the central part of the country where I grew up there in Denver, Colorado, and the surrounding area, Colorado Springs specifically. That was when I was about 12 years old, my family moved from the mountains of Arizona, Pinetop, Show Low, Lakeside, this tiny little town with a huge 5A school where all kinds of bizarre freak show stuff was going on. But when I finally got up to Colorado Springs and Denver, Colorado, you guys are like the central hub of the capital of the United States. And I know that's perplexing considering that we all look at the District of Columbia and all the corporation of the United States is centered there. However, the actual continuity of government's capital is the central of the United States. And that's what Denver is. This is why Denver, Colorado has had so much technology and so many of the Central Intelligence Agency, the Defense, all these alphabet soup agencies have relocated their predominant headquarters to that region. And a lot of that really got burgeoned into existence in the early 2000s and post the kind of recession timeframe. That was a lot of the stimulus packages that Colorado boosted up. But one of the most famous deep underground military bases in all of society today is what's called Fort. Hold on, let me just show it up. Cheyenne Mountain here is the Air Force Base. I'm going to share screen so you guys can just check this out, because this will help you have a better idea of what's going on here. So this is Cheyenne Mountain. Now, Cheyenne Mountain is a deep underground military base that's literally the entire, just outside of Colorado Springs. Colorado Springs is the second largest city in Colorado. And there, if you're just sitting downtown, you can look out at the front range of Colorado. Colorado is basically Kansas on one side, and then it's split right in the middle by the Rocky Mountains. They extend for thousands of miles in north and south of there. But right there is where everybody lives. The vast majority of the population centers are right there, centered along that front foothills, just in front of these massive 14,000-foot mountains. Cheyenne Mountain is one of these massive granite mountains, decomposing granite and what's called Pikes Peak granite. And so granite is incredibly strong. It allows you to be able to put up a very strong defensive system for nuclear attacks. So Cheyenne Mountain was one of these first cities that was built underground. And I know a lot of times they're only going to show you, this is one of the entrances to one of the doors. That is a blast door. What you're looking at there is that entire door is designed to seal off this entire compartment of this building so that there can be this continuity of government for what's called NORAD. NORAD is the central hub of all things Space Command. Today we'd be talking about Space Force, this new wing of the United States military. Before that, everything was just junctured under the United States Air Force. And what they did is they built this center to be able to control and communicate with everybody out there, in specifics, the air assets. So anything from a tiny little rock that's flying around, basically bigger than a meter, anything that's about this big or bigger, they can track it and have been tracking it everywhere in the entire world simultaneously. All of that information gets fed into one centralized location there in Cheyenne Mountain. That is the place from which this war was inevitably planned to be fought. The entire building rests on springs. Let's see if I have that picture of that. But basically, this is a different one over there in Hawaii. This is another deep underground military base entrance. And so you'll see these hallmarked into specific types of geology. They're looking for specific kinds of stone to be able to burrow into that's more conducive for it. This is out here in Missouri. This is near a place called Carthage, Missouri. And these are civilian accessible. Whereas where I come from in Colorado, all this was military centered. Out in the Ozarks, which is another central ridge that's lifted up. It's called the Ozark Plateau, another geological feature of when there's this giant plains of Kansas and Nebraska, Iowa, all of these giant plains. Well, then the Ozark Plateau lifts up, and the limestone, the dolomite, the karst topography, which is very similar to what they had in Vietnam that was so conducive for building tunnels, is very conducive for building these deep underground military bases. There's a very public one that you can watch people going in and out of, which is called Springfield Underground, which is a 3 million square foot underground city. This is where many of the headquarters for places like Kraft and a lot of these food distributors have underground storage, and they live there. People work there, they go underground, and they live their entire day-to-day lives down under these little places. But this is a tunnel boring machine that was used by the United States Air Force in order to construct these massive tunnels systems that you can see. These are kind of the modern public version of it. In the 1950s, they began to patent and start utilizing nuclear fusion, a form of just rock, melting the rock face itself so that you could create a liquid channel of rock and then harden it. So then you didn't have to reinforce it with concrete. You didn't have to put in any reinforcements. You could literally just liquefy the rock. And this is what enabled them to start doing that. Entire little ports and cities, like there's these tunnels that operate from the Pacific coast out near the Seattle, Washington area that go all the way inland into Iowa or into Idaho and northern Idaho. And this is where a lot of our submarine bases and deep underground military bases that facilitate the Navy side of things operate. But NORAD specifically, the entire bunker system for this whole little underground city sits on springs. And this was designed so that during the 1950s, it could survive a direct hit from a nuclear weapon by Russia. Now, my experiences was right there through Cheyenne Mountain. And so there's a guy named my military handler at the time when I got brought up here to start working with the United States Air Force. His name was Lieutenant Colonel Lonnie Weaver, and he was a commander here at NORAD. And so he was someone who oversaw a lot of these underground projects. And the reason that so much of this occult and special access projects begin to move down beneath ground is because it allows for a level of secrecy and control when you're the guy who gets to know where people are going in and out. If you can control these single doors going in and out, you can make sure that nobody's coming into these places readily without massive oversight. These are all just different facilities that you guys can see. And here's another one. This is the NSA's one in Hawaii. This is places like Edward Snowden. You guys are familiar with the guy who brought out a lot of these leaks and brought this stuff forward. He was working in one of those deep underground military bases. Hawaii, I did an interview that is called Reptilians, Military Secrets, and Hawaii's Hidden History. And I did that with some folks called Hebrew Hawaii. and they are there on on Oahu, and they were sharing a lot of the secrets about the military bases that are out there. There's more deep underground military bases on Hawaii than almost anywhere else in the entire United States, because it is a central hub for the military. This is another one that's a Lockheed range, an underground entrance there at the end of a runway, which allows aircraft, experimental X-class projects to be able to land and be able to go underground without being readily seen. Here's another one that's been utilized, a little more derelict, older stuff. But a lot of this infrastructure you guys got built and put into place in the 1950s. So when you go into these, it literally is just, it looks like you're going into another industrial building. The military builds things to last for a long time, and so there's linoleum floors, and it just looks like you're in a regular hallway with UV, with the just, regular lights. It's not anything that looks like exciting. It's not sexy at all. There's nothing to be noted. There's nothing wonderful to be noticed. You can't a lot of times tell you're actually in an underground facility, because a lot of the entrances for this, you're going to be entering into a regular above ground building, and then you're going to be progressively working your way down below ground. And so it allows them a level of secrecy. Like these are ones that what it looks like more above the United States Air Force Academy. There's a road up there that's called Rampart Range Road, which is a public access road. But on the other side of that is that entire mountainside is the United States Air Force Academy property. And they have entrances just like this, which are concealed into the granite faces of it. And so these are the ones that you start to get access into these kinds of rooms. This is what is really the underground projects teams. So when I started working inside of these facilities, my entire life got turned upside down, because I began to see a world that is completely contrary to the system of what we have when it comes to technology and when it comes to like how the world actually functions and operates. So we shared a little bit more of that in the last episode that Em and I did, involving things like Neptunium, superconductors, magnetic levitation trains. There's a way of moving and transporting people around and goods around that's completely different than what we had. And the reason that we don't have maglev trains, the reason we don't have high-speed trains and rail cars up here on the surface, is because they don't want anybody to have access to that except for who they say they can, because it transforms a society when you're able to move things with limitless without need for power. When you don't need the same power systems that you have, it allows those control mechanisms to begin to break down. That old world society, the petrochemical based industry that is so benefited financial kingdoms like the Rockefellers and the Carnegies, and a lot of these societies that were established, and they are fueling this system. The petrochemical basis for our society is what has enabled so much of these overarching power controllers to rule up here. But down beneath the ground, it's a completely different currency that's under there. And the currency that's down there is truly secrecy. And so they enforce these secrets explicitly. And so when I got brought down into there, I got to see that really it's an inverse kingdom of power. And the only way that you get in and out of that kingdom is through secrets. And so if you're able to traffic in those secrets effectively, you can broach your way into there. However, more often than not, getting out of there requires you to create what's called dead man switches. I wrote a blog post a few years ago because some people tried to kill me when my wife was 7 months pregnant with my last daughter. And I really thought that was the end of it. And I wasn't going to get to hear Jubilee anything she ever had to say. And so after that, I wrote this blog post because it was like, game on, like screw this. Some of you guys have secrets like this that could buy your way out of the underworld. Some of you gals have access to these secrets. And I'm just going to tell you right now, the best thing you can do with that is broadcast them consistently, broadly, as fast as you can, as readily as you can. And I understand some of you want to keep your insurance policies and keep them buried away for another time, and you share out your insurance policies with other people in case you get killed or injured. However, best thing you can do with the secrets is to utilize them effectively to be able to get your way out of that system. And that was one of the ways that started getting me out of there, is that I stopped working with them to keep their secrets, and I started wanting to find a way to weaponize their secrets against them so that people could get set free from the system instead of being trapped in it the rest of their life.
Wow, thank you so much for that. This is a topic I think we've all, to some degree, maybe seen a photo, but there's so many questions around, what's true? Do they actually exist? What goes on down there? And you had mentioned the reptilian aspect. What are your thoughts on that part of it? And are they doing human experiments down there? Are they creating hybrids, like what some of the rumors say? Like what else are they hiding down there aside from some of these cartels that they're running through the tunnels?
I mean, I shared a bit of the testimony of what I saw at this place called the Church in Denver, which is a nightclub that was converted from an old Catholic church. And I was meeting with these people during what was called the Cannabis Awards. And there was a guy in there. It was a meeting for all kinds of people that were doing technology stuff with graphenes and stuff from hemp products. And there was a guy who was in the sub basement. There's a layer, a dance floor below the main dance floor in there, which is totally just like the textbook ritual room that you see under a lot of these Catholic churches. Anyways, there was this guy in there that straight up had the reptiloid features, like the iconic version of a reptilian: green skin, no nose, pronounced jawline, slit eyes, just, and I had to literally, I was doing security protections for a company, a data storage tech startup company that was handling what was called highly disruptive technology. They had a storage drive that on a size of your phone could store a petabyte of data. And there's a lot of people who don't want that stuff getting out there. And this was the stuff that would enable a lot of AI processing and military industrialists to be able to take this thing to a totally different level. Surveillance state on a continual basis because you start recording in 8K and all this other stuff. Anyway, so I was like their security team lead, and I was staring at this reptilian looking guy and had to ask the CEO. I'm like, Charles, are you seeing this guy? He's like, oh yeah, the reptilian. He's like, yeah. And these people inside this world, you guys, you got to understand that they are aware of so many of what you and I would call or get branded as these conspiracies that are taking place, but there really are other individuals who have given themselves over to a form of genetic alteration on a completely different scale than what you and I think is normal. These are people who've been playing with genes for a long time. And because of that, they started splicing in all kinds of other genetics in order to enhance themselves and give themselves abilities that are not like the others. And really, one of those is foundationally one of these parasitic relationships that can happen when you start cannibalizing, when you start consuming human blood, you start consuming plasmas, and you start consuming a lot of the byproducts of the adrenal glands during stress, like when people start picking kidneys and pulling out stuff out of the adrenals. It alters them, and it begins to transform them fundamentally into something other than what is entirely human. So these hybridization projects are not something to be trifled with. And what you start to encounter down there is the experimental research centers, the hubs of this. This is where the genetics labs are located, and this is what allows people to become other than just human 2.0, what the Nazis used to call Ubermensch. It was the backbreeding of the Aryans to the gods. They were trying to recreate the gods of old. They really believed fundamentally, if you cannot understand the fundamental root of so much of our society's architecture for the military and for the national security councils and for what is the titans of our eras today, we call them corporations. These corporations are hands that are still servants to places like DARPA. The internet we're using right now still is the created being of the Advanced Research and Projects Agency, one of these deep underground research agencies for the United States military. They're giving us their 40-year-old technology. When they started bringing out this kind of information, what they do is they run like a test run to see if people are willing to swallow this pill and be comfortable with it. And when people freaked out, like when they started publishing, hey, yeah, we're doing cloning with Dolly the sheep back in the 1990s, there was all this publishing about, hey, we're doing cloning on these animals and people, how do you feel about that? And people freaked out and they weren't like it. So they put it back down underground. However, whenever a society won't openly accept these kinds of things, what they'll do is they'll execute these tactics like a Fabian war, where they're going to slowly, incrementally try to drive the agenda there. And this is what a lot of the ultimate agenda has been for the acceptance ideology, that we just accept anything and we embrace it wholly. The ultimate goal of that is to accept this type of hybridization of people. Now, real quick, I just got to be really blunt with you guys. I believe fundamentally, if there are still components of a soul within there, that these people have the opportunity and have the right to be able to receive the good news. They need an opportunity to hear the truth. They need the opportunity to be able to be understood, because a lot of them never had a choice in the matter. A lot of them got manipulated into this, and they need an opportunity to get healing and restoration. There's going to be a continuum there that sounds super strange, but a lot of people in our society today have been genetically altered. They've had genetic experimentation done through injectables that has altered them out of the image of what they were intended to be, and has permanently changed them through epigenetics, meaning that they're going to pass on these mutations to their children, and there's nothing they can do to stop it. And so we are living in a society that is genetically engineered into an image other than what our original intent was. This book was really important for me because I grew up down in Arizona. This all started for me down in these tunnels, seeing these other beings. When these people did these rituals, like it wasn't just so that they could drink blood and be all filthy and have sex with each other, and just grown men that wanted to have sex with boys. It was a completely other agenda. This, like, the reason the old religion exists is so that they can draw up these other beings that live in this underworld. There's a scientific version of this with the deep underground military bases. Then there's an old religion order of this. There's a completely older megalithic stuff that goes all the way back to antiquity, stuff that's been around forever, that has been buried, systemically and historically buried. This is why the Smithsonian Institute in the United States was created, was to conceal the true history of our country, of the world. They didn't want people to understand that these advanced cultures and civilizations have been the norm all the way into antiquity. And there will be massive cataclysms and destructions and self-immolations as people turn back to this old religion where they're sacrificing humans, where they're consuming blood, and where they're willing to engage in this dark occult magic. When they embrace the shadim, what we would say demons, these shadows, when they start inviting them in and opening the gates to them, and bringing up this other world, because beneath our feet is this black inky mire. It's a real other world that exists down there. And you have one that's scientifically based, like up in North Dakota or South Dakota, there is the Fermi Labs. There's these laboratories that exist with particle accelerators and with atom smashers and cyclotrons. There's tens of thousands of them. People think about CERN and they think about, oh my gosh, they're opening portals under the Temple of Apollo and they're going to open up and do all these experiments. They've been doing this stuff for decades. They've been doing this stuff for so long, and they've been meddling with these portals. They're ultimately trying to open these portals to bring in these other entities, and they're using a scientific, technological version of it. But the old religion has been utilizing infanticide and child sacrifice to be able to summon these beings up to them. And so down in those tunnels, what I saw were dragons. And I know that's something that's so like out there, but there literally are dragons. I'm going to just pull up another screens here because this is just ridiculous. This is like, for thousands of years, y'all, we had like a history that was like knowable. Like we actually used to be able to read books and we'd be like, oh yeah, this is what's going on. Hold on a second. Bear with me here. Oh, hold on. Give me a second. The way that society used to be for a long time is that people understood that what we would call myths and legends were way people passed on information and preserved information so that their children wouldn't be trapped in this dumbfounded stupidity like we've been raised in. Oh, it's so frustrating because I grew up with this as my norm. I didn't grow up with this as like, oh yeah, you guys are just living in some kind of fantasy world where werewolves and demons and all this stuff are crawling around in the shadows. This is reality and has been forever. And this is why people for thousands of years have carved statues of it. They've made paintings of it. They've carved it into books. They've written it in their stories. They preserved it in their oral traditions. This is why this land, the United States of America, America literally means land of the plumed serpent. Quetzalcoatl has been the god of this nation forever. It's the same God again. They're trying to resurrect this plumed serpent. Here we go. Let me show this for you guys. Just they put this in front of your face. This is like a 10. Look at the size of this coin. Okay, this is the commemorative coin that the queen made. She's called the Queen of Beasts, right? This is literally the Queen of Beasts. What? This is back in 2014, and this is who her heraldry is, right? She's telling you that she is the queen over all this. This is like a 100-ounce gold coin that they made in commission for her. And if you notice how many of these are, you're like, oh yeah, normal creatures. I totally recognize these. And then you get all these hybrids, right? You got the phoenix, you got the dragons, you get the unicorns and all the rest of this. But what they're really getting at is what these animals used to be, right? If you go back into antiquity, just a few thousand years, this was the way that the world operated. Hold on a second. I'm going to flip through a bunch of these. The dragons. Okay. These are the serpent mounds. You start to analyze the archaeological excavations of what's been going on forever here. I did an interview with a guy called Eric, FM8, Firemedic 8, and it was called the House of Dragons. And we went into a lot more detail on the serpent cults and why my family tapped into this information because they were treasure hunters. Ultimately, they dug into a bunch of these mounds and they started finding books and tomes, and they found out how to engage in these rituals to draw up these serpents. This is a serpent mound that's out in, you got a bunch of these. This one's in Ohio. This is the Cult of the Serpent. Balaji Munkar. This is one of the best books for any of you who want to dig into the actual history of the world and what they used to find and how they used to summon and deal with these things, petroglyphs and everything else. That's why I have this chart back here. It's not just some fancy rainbow looking thing. This is how I can decipher all the ancient languages. And I'm trying to study through pictographic form because I grew up in Arizona where people would carve these things on petroglyphs and they would leave these markers for people so they could understand, hey, this is how you find that information. This is from archive.org. You can look up that book for free. Otherwise, it's a couple $100 online. But this is Quetzalcoatl, the temple of the plumed serpent that's down in Mexico. The capital of Mexico was designed to be this, where they were sacrificing sometimes 40,000 to 100,000 people a day. The entire society of Central America was only given over to this deity. That entire, all of the priest class that operated down there. There's a book that's called The Discovery and Conquest of Mexico, which is the firsthand account of a priest who was accompanying Hernando de Cortez when he came over, the conquistadors, and began to invade Central America. That shares about going into these temples where these priests have their dreadlocks made of intermingled with blood and organs and human skins that they would wear, and cannibal markets, that literally the meat class for this society, the meat that they ate was each other. And these priest class, they were governed by human sacrifice, and they'd given themselves over to this. These are their iconography that they were using to try to preserve these traditions. So down in Arizona at Lake Havasu, when the city of London brought over that bridge under Robert McCulloch and C.V. Ward, they were trying to bring about the resurrection of this from inside that bridge. They wanted to be able to raise up Quetzalcoatl. They wanted to have him and the spirit of death, who is over him, be able to come back into the United States and have his dominion reestablished in here. The reason that First Amendment was, or the freedom of religion was extrapolated on in our Constitution for more often than not, was not to protect the religious expression that you know to be cherished and to be guarded, but it was to protect this one. This is ultimately the new Atlantis of what Francis Bacon and a lot of their prophets have been trying to bring to resurrection, which is where people are openly willing to do what is only being done in secret. Emma and the people that she has on this show are talking about this underground society that's right beneath your feet, that's just out of the corner of your eye, but that's happening day and night right in front of your face because you're blinded by these very beings. They put a spiritual veil over people's eyes. This is why when you try to talk to them about these things that are going on, in reality, you're like, listen, every drop of water you drink is literally poison. And they're like, I'll have another. You know, you're like, what the heck is wrong with you guys? You're literally drinking dead. You're drinking death, like continually. You think they can filter out those pharmaceuticals? You're drinking so much birth control that you can't get pregnant because you're drinking birth control on a regular basis. That's a serious problem, y'all. Like, there's so much blood and death that goes into the drains. What do you think happens when they do an abortion and they cut up a human baby and they desiccate it and get rid of its blood? Where do you think that goes? Down your drain, down to your neighbor's drinking supply. And you wonder why our society is literally drinking in the blood. 80% of all the blood that's getting donated at these blood banks is going into pharmaceuticals that people are eating. They're cannibalizing each other on a continual basis. 20% is going to the hospital, and they're like, oh yeah, we're just going to save humanity with this. All the while, the pharmaceutical industry is just designing more and more drugs on this. But this is Quetzalcoatl, and this is the very same deities that have been ruling and reigning over this nation for a long time. They were driven nearly into extinction. A man named Charles Finney. Y'all, you want to read a book for a second? Just hold on a second. I just got to stab this in the throat. Charles Finney was a man. Some people used to fight this crap, and they used to lay down their lives and literally go to war against these secret societies, these oath keepers. Let me just put it a different way. The oath keepers, secret societies get too much of like, ooh, sexy involved in it. It's filthy, disgusting people that want to do all kinds of perversions. It's perverts. It's cults of perverts who want to protect and cover up other perverts from doing sycophantic evil. That's what these secret societies are. And they masquerade and they balance it out. You're like, oh yeah, we're gonna do balance our good deeds over on this side with our evil deeds on this side. You know, we're like the Shriners, we're gonna dedicate all of these funds towards these children, and we're gonna go ahead and rape and consume their flesh out on another time. And we're gonna balance the scales of Gayatu, and he's gonna accept us into his cult. It's disgusting. But this is literally, they almost got driven into extinction by people that were willing to expose their secrets. They had all these infiltrators. I love double agents, okay? They had all these guys who went in and joined fraternal organizations with another motive in mind. It was so savage. They were salty and sneaky. They would go in and they would document all of these oaths that they were saying, and then they would come out and publish their rites and their rituals in manuals and in books and in flyers. And they started awakening society to what these people actually were doing, to this other agenda that was taking place, to these serpent cults that were trying to resurrect these old gods. And they literally almost eradicated them, drove them out of our country. They came so close to being able to do it. They accomplished driving them underground again because they were trying to rise up again. And they were so effective at doing that. Charles Finney wrote some incredible books on it and was one of those people who was speaking out against it. And I encourage you to seek it out. These are still preserved to this day. One of the things my dad did was take me back down to Mexico, Tulum, Mexico, and I got my open water scuba certification. And then one of the things he was hell bent on intent taking me was onto these temples to go into these little, they have these little, at the tops of a lot of these towers, they have this special chamber room where they would drink, and they would cut the heart of a person out of their body and they would eat it. The high priest would eat it and they would drink their blood. And this is a way they would pass on this life force through the priest class and ultimately to the king class. And these are all still preserved today. You can go down there today. This is literally the temple of the plumed serpent. These exist all over the United States, you guys. It's not like this is just Mexico. All over America, these mounds are everywhere. And under these mounds is this same kind of architecture. It's the same gods doing the same kind of worship. And now this is in literally Mexico City, one of the most populous places in Mexico. That's literally where the temple of the plumed serpent used to be. And this is what one of the renditions of what it used to look like. But Anyways, the reasons this came in, these are other hybrids that have been around forever, lion creatures and all the rest of it. The lion men of Moab, you ever read about these things in the Bible? Anyways, this stuff just absolutely fascinates me because people used to carve this into stone. They were literally lion hybrids. They've been around forever. The hybrids have been around forever. They just got driven underground because our society is like, we're not going to tolerate that anymore. And they're like, okay, we're going to surface eventually. But these beings literally would be conjured during these rituals, and they would come up and they would consume the life of the sacrifice, and then they would speak to people, sometimes telepathically, but more often than not, they literally spoke in the tongue of Nahash. That's a way of saying Hebrew or serpent in Hebrew. This is a different language called a twilight language. It's these other languages that these things speak to people, and they would literally speak to these leaders in this room and give them marching orders so that they would then go carry these out on the physical upper world. And this has been the communal exchange that's been going on for thousands of years between the old religion and their high priests, and then ultimately the kings, the corporations. This is how they're able to get these advanced technologies. This is how they're able to put themselves in positions of power, because there is a driving mechanism, an ancient hand, a black hand that's guiding and directing these things. Halel ben Shahar. These are the shot callers that have been in their own prison cells, the fallen watchers. Simyaza and Azazel and Gadriel. These are these ancient evils that have been around, these hierarchy that are still passing this information on to their assets. And this is literally the kingdom of darkness that we're wrestling with day and night. This is the city of London, who's the architect of the entire financial empire of the world. They still invoke these gods to this day because this is the masters of who, this is the ones who truly call the show. And this is the ones that I've been battling with my entire life, and why I want people to have an understanding. We can get free. This was the book I was going to reference earlier, which is written by John Darnell. This is not available online. I cannot find it anywhere. I'm working on trying to create it into a PDF so people can have it. But this is called What Did Jesus Mean? The Gospel to Every Creature. Good news for Nephilim, transhuman, enhanced humans, and anyone else who is the result of genetic experimentation. John Darnell. This subquote is: the only way to view someone who is not 100% genetically human is to see a human being whose genetics have been modified. Then you can tap into God's heart for redemption. This is some of the stuff that foundationally was critical for me to be able to understand that there's still an opportunity for redemption for me. There's this bloodline tracing that happened for me that goes all the way through the Orsini's and then back to the Babylonians. And they believe literally they're inhibitors. They're carriers of the seed of the serpent. They literally believe because they drink this black blood of these serpents that they get possessed by them and they have the divine right to rule as kings on this earth. And that was in my blood. And so I believed I was cursed. I was anathema. I had never had a right for redemption. And I could not be transformed into an image of just a mortal man, that I was destined to be one of these other things, these other creatures. And it wasn't until hearing people like this and testimonies like this that in the Gospel of Mark, he literally said, go therefore into all the nations, preaching this good news to every creature. It was that word creature, which is not person, not man. He literally said creature, that gave me hope, and why I still today want to advocate for the hope of these hybrids, that these people, these beings still have a right to life and a right to an opportunity to hear the truth being spoken. Because like you, they've been beguiled since their birth, since their conception, no matter what womb they came from, whether a laboratory or some kind of woman. Listen, you still have an opportunity for healing and redemption, and you have a testimony that the world needs to hear, whether they've abominated you beyond what you believe is your hope and your desire. But this is what you were born for, is to be able to find freedom, find a purpose, find a mission, and be able to serve in the true kingdom of truth.